Hey everyone, Corinne Rios here. It's Wednesday, August 18th. For years I've watched women be some of the strongest advocates for abortion. I've watched women support medical gender transition for minors, and I've watched women advocating for allowing biological males to participate in girl sports. And I always knew those debates existed, and I knew that women were the ones who were championing those causes. But when I started doing more social media and began talking about sexually explicit books being accessible to children in public libraries in the children's section, something just really genuinely surprised me. I was astounded by how many women defended children having access to sexually explicit material. And I kept asking myself, why? Women are often the caregivers. We are mothers, we are grandmothers. We are so often the ones bringing compassion and nurturing and protection into our families. So I have struggled to understand why, when we're talking about protecting children from sexually explicit material, some women become some of the strongest voices telling me there is nothing to worry about. And here's something else that has really struck me. I have had women telling me essentially, if you really care about protecting children, go after the Epstein files. That's what people will tell me, as if that negates what I'm talking about. And you know what? I care about those files too. Many of Epstein's victims were minors, and anyone who sexually exploited or abused those children should be held accountable, and I don't care who they are. But protecting children can't suddenly become important only when we're talking about a massive national scandal. We should care about protecting children before they're victimized too. And I want people to understand something about New Mexico law. There is a reason New Mexico has laws dealing with material legally defined as harmful to minors. At some point, lawmakers recognized that there are sexual materials children should be protected from. Apparently, at one point, New Mexico still had some common sense about that. Except the law contains an exception, and that exception is broader than just librarians. It covers bona fide schools, museums, and public libraries, plus employees acting in that capacity. And this issue is deeply personal to me. Someone in my family, not one of my children, was molested as a child. I lived through that experience alongside them. I watched that child grow up, and I watched the aftermath of what happened and what happened affect all areas of that person's life. More than 20 years later, it still eats at me. And because of that experience, combined with my master's degree and background in early childhood development, I have understood for decades that exposing developing children to sexually explicit material can be harmful. Because when a child is sexually harmed, it doesn't necessarily end when the incident ends. The aftermath can follow that child for years. And that's why, for me, this conversation isn't simply about whether somebody thinks a few sexually explicit books in a children's library are a big deal. Because what happens to one child can become the reason we fight to protect another child. And here's what I think some people are missing. The concern isn't only about what sexually explicit material to a child sees. It's also about how exposure can affect a child's behavior toward other children. So let me make that connection for you. In 2023, research published a systematic review and meta-analysis examining 27 studies involving approximately 16,000 children and adolescents. They looked at the relationship between exposure to sexual content and what researchers call problematic sexual behavior. And they found that children and adolescents exposed to nonviolent sexual content had 82% higher odds of problematic sexual behavior. For those exposed to violent or live sexual contact, the odds were approximately 2.5 times higher. 82% higher odds. That's not something I think we should just dismiss. Now, I want to be very clear about what that means. It does not mean that every child exposed to sexually explicit material is going to become a molester. That's not what the research says, and that's not what I'm saying. What it does show is a measurable association between exposure to sexually explicit content and problematic sexual behavior in minors. And problematic sexual behaviors is not simply normal childhood curiosity. It can include behavior that is developmentally inappropriate, intrusive, aggressive, coercive, or potentially harmful to the child or to another child. And that's important because children can sexually harm other children. Another U.S. study followed more than 1,500 young people ages 10 to 15 for approximately 3 years. Researchers found that intentional exposure to violent X-rated material was associated with almost 6 times the odds of self-reported sexually aggressive behavior, even after accounting for several other factors. In that particular study, nonviolent X-rated material did not show the same statistical significant association. And that's an important distinction. I'm not trying to scare parents. I'm trying to explain why children's exposure to sexually explicit material shouldn't simply be dismissed as harmless. And then I hear, well, I monitor my children. Well, good, you should. But here's the problem. You can't monitor every child your child comes in contact with. Your child may go to school. Maybe they go to youth group at church. They play sports. Maybe they attend birthday parties and camps and sleepovers. They go to friends' homes. You can monitor your child, but you don't know what every other child has watched, seen online, or been exposed to in their own home. And you don't necessarily know whether another child has developed problematic sexual behaviors. Your children don't grow up in isolation. They interact with other people's children. So when I talk about protecting children from sexually explicit material, I'm not only thinking about the child seeing it, I'm thinking about the child around them too. Again, this isn't about labeling children who have been exposed to sexually explicit material in the future as offenders. There are many factors involved in problematic sexual behavior, including development, environment, trauma, abuse, and other experiences. This is about prevention, not labeling children. Now, I also want to become accurate about what the research does and does not show. The studies I'm talking about examined sexual content exposure broadly, including pornography, X-rated material, and live or with violent sexual contact. They did not specifically study sexual explicit books checked out of the public libraries, and I am not claiming they did. But they do show why the broader question of exposing developing children and adolescents to sexual content deserves serious discussion. So instead of dismissing this as a non-existent issue, maybe we should start asking, what does the research say? What material is appropriate at what age? What role should parents have? And what can we reasonably do to protect children before another child is harmed by a child? New Mexico laws itself recognizes that certain sexually oriented material can be harmful to minors, and minors is defined as anyone under age 18, while also exempting bona fide schools, museums, and public libraries and employees acting in that capacity. I think New Mexicans have every right to question whether that exemption still makes sense. And finally, from my Christian perspective, I believe I have a responsibility here too. Proverbs tells us to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Children don't write these laws. They don't vote, and they don't always have the ability to protect themselves. They need adults willing to be their voice. So yes, I care about the Epstein files and those victims, but protecting children shouldn't begin only after they've already become victims. Prevention matters too. And when the research shows 80% higher odds of problematic sexual behavior, I'm not going to call that a non-existent issue. I'm going to speak up for children. And I want you to know that I'm going to put a link so you can go view the sexually explicit books we're talking about. We are not just talking about books print. We're talking about pictures, okay? and I don't even know if I can say this, but I'm going to say it. There's one book that has a picture of a male giving another male I don't know if I can say this, doing a sexual act. And it's in full color, shows all the sexual parts. I can't show that on Facebook. Did you know that? So if I can't show that picture on Facebook, but yet it's in the children's section in the libraries, there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that. So I'm going to leave you that link there. And I hope that New Mexico can start having a conversation about protecting children and not just protecting somebody's author identity, because this is what the issue is. A lot of the left wants you to believe that we want these books taken out of the children's section because the author identifies as homosexual, transgender. That's not true at all. And they're deceiving you when they do that. We're talking about sexually explicit books. All right, you guys, I got a busy day today. You have a great day. Bye.